guys, thanks for coming. Today our speaker is Dr. Kathryn Ford. She received her PhD in geological oceanography from URI Graduate School of Oceanography. She currently manages the Fisheries Habitat Program at DMF, which handles ocean planning, environmental review, and habitat research that focuses on eelgrass, marshes, and artificial reefs. Her research focuses on mapping and classifying seafloor habitats with video and acoustic methods. She is a member of the NEFMC Habitat PDT, the Mass Ocean Science Advisory Council, and represents the DMF on the Northeast Regional Planning Body. And she's also an adjunct professor at UMass Dartmouth and teaches GIS.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. The drive was actually really easy, and I'm glad that I'm in between storms, because yesterday we got 6 inches, and tomorrow, or for the next couple of days, we're supposed to get 18. I'm down in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is near Cape Cod, so it's been a great winter. We haven't had to go to work very often. And fortunately, I'm not doing any field work right now, which is great. So I wanted to explain what the NEFMC is. I don't think I've ever heard it called that before. So I work for Fisheries Agency. Sometimes I feel like a translator between geology and biology. The NEFMC is the New England Fisheries Management Council, or the council. And so this is one of our major management bodies in New England. And I work closely with the Habitat Committee on our Habitat Plan Development team. So today I'm going to talk to you about eelgrass mapping using a low-cost sidescan sonar unit, some work we did last summer. And if I have time, I'm going to include a second part to the talk. So the first part is about some equipment exploration that we've been doing, and then hopefully I'll have time to get to the actual application of all of this work, where we've seen a dramatic loss of eelgrass in one of our 3 bay systems in Massachusetts, and we're trying to quantify that loss and record it, because a lot of times we know about these losses, but we don't actually record them. So I work for a state agency, Division of Marine Fisheries. This is our mission according to state law. I won't go through that in too much detail. And the way we're set up is we have quite a few programs that do different things. So our resource assessment program, they go out and count fish. Policy, they develop policies and different regulations for fisheries management in Massachusetts. We also study shellfish, lobster, anadromous fish, particularly herring, sport fish. We have a big sport fish program. We have a very large recreational fishery in Massachusetts. We have a gear engineering program. They actually design fishing gear that's either focused on reducing bycatch or focused on reducing habitat impacts. We have a protected species program that looks at whales and turtles, mostly with their interactions between lobster gear, horseshoe crabs, and then I'm in fisheries habitat, which is the best one of all. Most of what we do is environmental review, so we look at the impacts of things like pipelines and bridges and wind farms and that sort of thing. And then we, of course, have IT and administration. So environmental review is probably 50 to 70% of what my group does. We're about 10 people. Climate change, we've started assembling all of the temperature records that Massachusetts has. We actually discovered that our own agency has the largest bottom temperature database in New England. So we've assembled all of that, and it's now available for anybody to request. So if you need bottom temperature data, this is instrument collected bottom temperature data. You're welcome to ask us for it. Ocean planning has been very busy in the last decade or so. There's state efforts as well as regional efforts to create ocean plans to help us better manage the oceans and the uses that occur in the oceans. And then we do a wide variety of habitat research. So today I'll be focusing on our eelgrass and benthic habitat work. So in Massachusetts, a critical marine fisheries habitat is in decline. Our existing aerial mapping efforts give reasonable statewide estimates for this decline, but we need capability for estimates that are both at a finer spatial and temporal resolution. So what methods can we use and what methods should we use? Logistics are huge for us because, as every state agency, we're underfunded. So first let me tell you a little bit about eelgrass. the scientific name is Zostera marina. It's a perennial sublittoral flowering plant, the only one we have in Massachusetts. Horizontal rhizomes with flat-bladed leaves. That's a picture of it on the right-hand side. Grows to a maximum depth of about 20 feet. The optimal growth salinity is 20 to 30 parts per thousand, but it can withstand living in conditions of almost fresh water to hypersaline water. And then optimal growth temperature is 50 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but again, can withstand a very broad temperature range. It'll winter over, it loses leaves in the wintertime, but ice damage is more serious than any sort of temperature damage for this plant. It vegetatively reproduces. It also produces seeds that has air spaces in the leaves to keep it upright. It's very acoustically visible. It is typically found in monospecific stands, which is great because it's so acoustically visible, and as long as it's monospecific, we can get good estimates of the aerial coverage of this particular plant. We do have some trouble with algae, but I'll get to that later. It is circumglobal. It's found on the U.S. East Coast from North Carolina to Maine and into Canada. So it's not considered globally threatened, but a lot of local extinctions have occurred, and in Massachusetts we have on record losses that have never recovered in certain embayments. It's very ecologically important. This is why the Division of Marine Fisheries is interested in this plant. It's considered the most productive shallow sedimentary environment in Massachusetts. It's a very important source of organic matter in the estuarine ecosystem. It has both faunal diversity and abundance increase when eelgrass shoot density increases. We find juvenile fish, mollusks, and crustaceans that use eelgrass meadows. We also find squid eggs attaching to eelgrass blades. Another species of particular interest to us is bay scallops. They use eelgrass. Eelgrass traps and binds the sediment. There's some evidence that eelgrass beds can help with coastal erosion problems. It's a preferred food for several species of wildfowl. The historical focus on eelgrass was concerns of loss of wildfowl due to loss of eelgrass. And human uses, I find this fascinating because we don't do this today at all, but in the past and in other parts of the world, humans use eelgrass for thatch, insulation, filler for bedding, and compost. So grad students out there, if you need a bed, oh no, wait, no, don't do that now because eelgrass is in decline. Don't do it now. So these are some of this is the evidence we have that eelgrass is in decline. We have reports from 1893 to 1894. The thought that the loss at that time was caused by extremely cold weather. The eelgrass decline is well known in the 1930s due to a slime mold epidemic. This is called the wasting disease, and there are devastating losses of eelgrass on the U.S. East Coast. The estimates in New England and in Massachusetts are that we started to see recovery from the 1930s epidemic by the 1960s in some locations. Not all locations actually recovered. And Fonseca states that eelgrass aerial coverage is currently considered at a historic low for the U.S. East Coast. So Massachusetts has been mapping it since 1951. Prior to 1951, there were just anecdotal reports of where it was and how much there was, like we have eelgrass in this embayment. So in 1951, we see the first aerial maps, which is pretty progressive because flying airplanes with cameras on it was really used primarily in World War II. It was really optimized around that time. So this is just after World War II. In the 1980s, there was a lot of work done by Joe Costa, particularly in southeastern Massachusetts. And then starting in the mid-1990s, our Department of Environmental Protection started a pretty formal aerial eelgrass mapping program. And they've done it several times since. So aerial mapping requires overflights with airplanes. Then you georeference those photos. You interpret the photos. So you have to figure out what the eelgrass is. And then you ground truth the photos. You go out and make sure that what you're seeing in your aerial photos is indeed eelgrass, because it could be algae in particular. So here's an aerial photo. You can see this black dotted stuff. This is a sandbar, and this is just the coastline. This is in Plymouth, Massachusetts, Kingston, Massachusetts, something like that. So this little black stuff is, they go out in the field, make sure that that's eelgrass, and then draw polygons around those patterns in the aerial photos. So the analyses of recent maps done by our DEP, they estimate losses of about 20% of seagrass area over time periods of a decade. Some embayments, we see a total loss. This has largely been attributed to eutrophication as opposed to harvesting or any other causes. We do not believe that this is a wasting disease issue. This is Wacoit Bay in Falmouth, which is on the south side of Cape Cod. I'll have some maps of Massachusetts in a minute for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So this is 1951. The black is the eelgrass extent. 1971, you can see lots of losses by then. And then the mapping that was done in 1995, there was no eelgrass in Wacoit Bay, and there hasn't been since. So we know how to figure out where the grass is. That's awesome. We're excited about that. But what's been happening to us at DMF is we're getting calls like, we lost eelgrass here last winter. We're worried about that. We also get a lot of calls. We're right in the middle of some issues right now with fishermen, people thinking that fishermen are impacting eelgrass. And so in Massachusetts, it's legal to hydraulic clam through eelgrass, and a hydraulic clam shoots jets of water into the substrate to loosen up the clams, and then the clams get harvested. We have no evidence of fishermen actually fishing in eelgrass beds, and surf clams aren't typically found in eelgrass beds, but it is a legal activity. So whenever we get a report like that, we kind of rush out to that bed and check it out. We also have other questions like, how quickly do mooring scars recover? Because one of the more manageable impacts on eelgrass beds are moorings. This is a picture of West Falmouth Harbor in Massachusetts. These are boats attached to little moorings, and then next to them are these little light green holes. So the dark green is the eelgrass, and the light green are the mooring scars from the chains scouring out around the mooring. Lately, a lot of people have been excited about conservation moorings, which is instead of a chain, you're using a flexible road. And so there's no, the theory goes, there's no scour on the seafloor. So we've been testing these conservation moorings to see if eelgrass can actually grow around conservation moorings. And so we were wondering, how can you actually measure the scar? And can you measure how quickly it fills in? These scars are about 6 feet in diameter, 3 to 6 feet in diameter, so they're pretty small. So our goals are to identify edges of eelgrass beds within about 25 feet. We want a minimum mapping unit of less than 100 feet. So here's a picture over here this is a barrier beach. The red box is 100 square feet. So we're trying to get features that are that size or bigger, which is small compared to what DEP is trying to do. We want to measure these mooring scars, these 6-foot diameter scars. We want really effective ground truthing, or efficient ground truthing might be a better word. So if we're going out and we're doing any mapping, how do we map and ground truth at the same time, logistically? We want something that's low cost. We're interested in possibly creating a network across the state, and so we'd have instrumentation and methodology that would go to harbor masters and shellfish wardens throughout the state. So it has to be low cost and basically disposable. So deployment and data processing has to be simple and quick. We need to be able to identify the eelgrass quickly and map it quickly. And we want results that are easy to interpret, so that people are convinced that what we're seeing is eelgrass. We also don't have a vessel dedicated to this. We want a vessel of opportunity kind of approach, so it could go out on any boat. So can our mapping needs be met with aerial mapping? And if any of you have been doing aerial mapping before, it's pretty expensive. The high resolution state aerials cost about $300,000 for a survey. They're taking a long time because in order to get good images of the grass, you have to deal with glare. You want it at a certain time of year to get maximum growth of eelgrass. And so some of our surveys are taking 2 or even 3 years to complete for the whole state. We can't use drones right now because of licensing. It's something we're looking into. Our governor just transitioned, so crossing my fingers, to either use the existing licensing process or that FAA will come out with new licensing requirements. We also use a volunteer flight service, which is fabulous. So we do go up in airplanes and take pictures. It's a great tool, but it's hard to time flights with volunteers, and it's very hard to georeference the photos because they're quite literally, being taken out of an airplane window. We also use, whenever we can, anything available to us freely, Google Earth, Bing, Esri, which makes ArcGIS. They have base map aerial photos. So sometimes I'll use all of those when I'm looking at a particular area, but we never know what the timing is. The quality is often compromised. And this is just a picture from Google Earth where you could see the bed really clearly here, but this line in the water is just glare. It's just a glare line. And so this whole part of the image was compromised. And all of these aerial approaches have to be ground truth. You still have to go out and make sure you're seeing eelgrass instead of algae. The other problem we have with aerials, it's not a huge problem, but they are limited by the optical clarity of water, and that's why the timing of the flights is so important. So if you get a sudden bloom, you're out of luck because you're not going to be able to see the eelgrass anymore. And anything on the deeper edge, these beds can grow to 20 or even 30 feet in Massachusetts. We do have records of as deep as 50 feet. I'm skeptical of those, but the timing, so those deeper meadows can't be seen because the water's just too deep. I threw this in here really quickly. There is a method, hyperspectral methods, and if you're interested in hyperspectral methods or you do it, I'd love to talk to you. But the bottom line is we're not pursuing this because of cost, although there are some low-cost drone-mounted hyperspectral units that we're looking into. It'd be really fun. So we focused on acoustic methods. The air in the leaves makes eelgrass very acoustically reflective, so it's a great plant to map with acoustics, and again is monospecific typically. So we looked at a Klein sidescan sonar that images in both 100 and 500 kilohertz. Biosonic's DTX single beam sonar that takes its acoustics at 420 kilohertz. And then the Humminbird side imaging sonar, which is just a side scan sonar at 455 kilohertz. We don't need optically clear water with acoustics, and so we could sample during any time of day. We can also sample at any season, but we do have to be careful about, if we're doing aerial mapping, being consistent with anything other people are doing, because if we're looking at the area of an eelgrass bed, that's typically done at the height of the growing season. So we would want to be consistent with that. For ground truthing, we do take out very small cameras. This is an AquaView camera. It costs $150 on Amazon. We don't record any of this video. It's strictly in the field, quick shot ground truthing. Nothing quantitative is done. We don't look at eelgrass quality. We don't look at eelgrass density. We just make sure it's eelgrass. So we use that AquaView, and then we have a Sea Viewer too, which is a little bit bigger of a system. Won't make any assumptions, but I bet a lot of you are pretty familiar with acoustics. So single beam systems are just looking down under the vessel or under the transducer. It sends a ping of acoustic energy to the seafloor. The ping is reflected off the seafloor and returned to the instrument, which records those pings. So these are single beam instruments. We use both a Humminbird single beam and a Biosonics single beam system. And this is what the output looks like. So if you're on a boat and you see a depth finder, this is most likely what you're looking at. So it shows you primarily used for bathymetry, but you can also see other features like fish and eelgrass on the seafloor. This is an image of side scan system. So with a side scan system, it's actually looking out to the sides of the transducer. So this would be the path of the vessel in the middle. The black part is the water column, and then the acoustic energy hits the seafloor right here, and then it goes out from there. So this is another picture. Here's the boat up here driving along, and this is what the side scan can see. So this over here, this white stuff in the water column are fish. And here's a wreck. A couple of words I use a lot. Mosaic is when you take swaths from your side scan and stitch them together to make a map. And the range, or the swath width, is the amount of seafloor covered by a single pass of the instrument. And when you operate at higher frequencies, you get higher resolution and lower range. So here are some signals you can see on the left. I have single beam, and on the right I have side scan. Eelgrass is really easy to see in these instruments, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. So it's very easy to train your eye to these patterns. And here's just an example. This is single beam. This is the biosonics data. Here's no eelgrass. There's some eelgrass. No eelgrass, eelgrass. Here on the side scan, in the middle here is that water column, and then off to the right is this shaded pattern over here is eelgrass. So with our Klein, we use the Klein to map mooring scars in Manchester, Massachusetts. So that's up here. And then we used it in Plymouth, Massachusetts, because we got a complaint of hydraulic clamming in a nearshore bed. It's sort of an interesting story. The people were worried about it. They were studying it because they were dredging an inlet, and they were worried that the clamming would wipe out this bed and they'd get blamed for it. So we helped them out to monitor that. And we use, for the Klein, a 35-foot vessel, and the side scan is a towed side scan system. So here's an image of the system here. It also has a computer. You could use a laptop. This must be a pretty old photo. And this is the processing unit. So you have quite a few pieces of instrumentation. It collects at both frequencies, 100 and 500. We process this data with Keras and Sonar TRX. I'm not going to talk about processing today, but those are the two software systems we use. Biosonics DTX was used to map mooring scars in Manchester, same location. And in Duxbury, Mass, we received a complaint that all of the eelgrass had disappeared. It was kind of funny talking to the person. There was none left, according to them. And so in Duxbury, we used a 17-foot vessel. This is not a towed system. It was gunnel mounted. So here's the gunnel mount right there. It was on a pole. We got the GPS right above it. It's a pretty heavy transducer. It weighs about 20, maybe 25 pounds. This is the processing unit and laptop integrated for all the collection. This data is collected in 420 kilohertz. It's processed with proprietary software from Biosonics called Visual Habitat. And the Hummingbird I discovered last summer, even though it's been out for over a decade. We use this to map mooring scars in West Falmouth, Massachusetts, down here on Buzzards Bay. The Biosonics stopped working in the middle of our Duxbury survey, so we took the Hummingbird up there to finish it up, and this is Duxbury over here. And to run the Hummingbird, we used a jet ski with the transducer stern mounted. This is the whole mount right here. So this is the whole system for the Hummingbird. This is the transducer, the cable, and all the processing and GPS, integrated GPS into that. So the processing unit is right up here, and there's the transducer. This collected side scan data in 455 kilohertz, and at the same time it collects single beam data in 200 kilohertz. The side scans processed with Sonar TRX, which is optimized for Hummingbird data, and we didn't use any of the single beam data because we didn't have any way to process it quickly. So this is what the Klein shows us for eelgrass. It's beautiful. I mean, the Klein is awesome. So this fuzzy stuff over here is all eelgrass. There's a clear shot of the eelgrass bed. The meadow was clearly visible, both on board and in the post-process mosaic. We had no indications of algae interference. We actually have an algae bed immediately seaward of this eelgrass bed. We didn't see the algae at all. It was a polysiphonia or some sort of red filamentous algae, and we couldn't see it. It had very consistent positional accuracy, even though it's a towed instrument, and we assessed that doing multiple passes on the same line. We only tow it maybe 30 to 50 feet behind the vessel. And so we were actually really, we were a little surprised at how good the positional accuracy was. But it is towed pretty close to the vessel. We didn't see any evidence of hydraulic clamming. Hydraulic clamming is very easy to see in side-scan data. Even in a flat, sandy bottom, the tracks are perfectly clear. There's enough physical disturbance to see the tracks, and they're curved. They're typically curved tracks. We didn't see any curves. We didn't see any straight lines. No evidence of the clamming. And we got to know this area pretty well, and a clammer would have been crazy to go in there because there were a lot of rocks. Our problems were the equipment's really heavy. It's got a lot of pieces. It requires a lot of power. We had to have a generator on board. It's towed, so we usually are surveying in areas with a lot of lobster gear or moorings or something like that. So it can be pretty challenging. We have tried using this system with a handheld GPS, and we couldn't. It just doesn't like that signal. So we really needed to get a more expensive $5,000 GPS system, which isn't exactly something you want to hand over to a shellfish warden in any of the towns. It's very flexible in terms of depth. It doesn't give us downward-looking data. It really only does the side scan, so we don't have any of that single beam data, which can be helpful too. But it's such a great image, beautiful picture.
What was the depth there?
This depth was 20 feet at the eelgrass bed, and each side of the eelgrass bed, like probably right there, is probably 12 feet. 12 to 15 feet. So it was this actually a tiny little trough almost between two sort of sand ridges. So this is the biosonics system. This is what biosonics data looks like when it's been processed. So the visual habitat software spits out this map and it'll tell you where the grass is and where it's not. So sort of flat bottom and fuzzy grassy bottom is what it tells you. So the brown is all flat bottom, and the little specks of green are where there's grass or something really fuzzy sticking up. We could see the meadow clearly, also very easy to interpret signal, both on board and post-processed. We had no indications of algae interference, but we didn't really test it either. We did have algae down in this area, but we really didn't look at that carefully. The meadows that we looked at in 2013 aerials, which I don't know if this is good enough for you to see, but in this aerial from 2013, there's eelgrass here, and we didn't find any eelgrass. There's also a big meadow down here that we didn't find any eelgrass in our survey. So it was there in 2013, and it's definitely gone now. The equipment was pretty heavy for what you get. I mean, this is a single beam system. It's pretty heavy, had many pieces. This also required a lot of power. On a bigger boat, you could plug it into the boat power, but we had a 17-foot skiff. We needed a generator. It took us an hour to set this thing up to do some single beam surveys. It was pretty frustrating. It was very flexible in terms of depth. We've done surveys in a couple hundred feet of water with this instrument. Very easy to interpret the data. The visual habitat processing is fabulous. And this one only gives that downward looking, no side scan. Love the automated processing, but the field collection was just sort of ridiculously complicated for what you get. So this is the Humminbird system, very lightweight side scan system. Here's a 2013 aerial photograph on the left. And this is these two lines are the Humminbird lines that we ran on a jet ski. And I hope you can see it, but right on top of this bed, you can see a very distinct pattern in the acoustic imagery. You can also see it very clearly up here. That coincided really well with this bed. And both of those beds were still present in 2014. We loved the visibility of the meadow both on board while we collected data as well as in post-processing. But it was a little more challenging than the Klein. It's not as nice of an image. Maybe we can do something about that in processing, but the Klein was a lot easier to see. We had a lot of trouble with grass right under the transducer. Anytime you're really close to that transducer, the grass really just got washed right out. You couldn't see it. So we really had to be careful about our range and the distance of our survey lines and planning the survey properly to make sure we were covering a whole bed. We also found extremely consistent positional accuracy with this, just that little sort of handheld, tiny little box. And we did multiple passes on the same line. We'd find the edge of the bed in exactly the same spot every time. This was extremely easy to use. It was very low power. I powered it off of the jet ski battery. Very easy to deploy off of small vessels. People use these kayaks to do lake studies. And a car battery will last 4 to 8 hours, depending on how much the instrument's on. It would be hard to modify this for deeper water. It would be hard to tow this instrument. It's not very robust, so it's best used inshore. It does give both downward-looking data, that single beam, but we couldn't process it, as well as side scan. And I mentioned this already, that we had to be super careful about how we planned our surveys. So we'll keep using this for our bays and inshore work. With the Humminbird, so this is the single beam data from the Humminbird. Grass was very clear in this signal. We thought it was great. But the only algorithm that exists for the Humminbird data is to pull out the XYZ data. So you could do bathymetry work with this pretty easily. But we couldn't pull out this feature. So one of you should invent that. I'll give you my card. So the real benefit of the biosonics was, again, you get this simple single beam data, you get a very clear edge of the bed, and extremely rapid post-processing. They've nailed it with how they do their post-processing of their data. A lot of people use it on the West Coast. So for eelgrass, we've identified them. We're really happy. We're very happy with the methods we have to check on existing meadows. What would be really difficult for us to do would be find new ones, because it's inefficient enough that to try to side scan an entire bay would take us forever. So we really need to work in concert with those aerial mapping programs. The Humminbird was really efficient, inexpensive, very inexpensive. This is a $600 system. We just bought 3 of them. It's not hard to process the data. It's very easy to store the data. It's pretty small files. Collects both single beam and side scan. Still, we need that processing algorithm though. So we'll use this for our bay work. It'll be perfect for these estuaries that we go out in a lot. We're a little concerned about longer lines. Most of the lines we did were on the order of anywhere from 500 feet to about, I don't even think we met a mile. I mean, maybe half a mile. And so I don't know how it's going to do if you're trying to collect for hours at a time. The Klein we'll keep using in rougher environments and places where we need really high quality imagery. But it'll always be a little bit of a hassle to haul it out there. And I'm thinking we're just going to drop the DTX altogether. It's just too complicated for what you get. All right, so here are what the mooring scars look like in the side scan. This is Klein data out of Manchester Harbor. The little stars that you can barely see, those are the moorings. So you can see the stars line up really nicely with some of this side scan data. So this is what this backscatter data is telling you about the hardness and roughness of the seafloor. And this false color imagery is, I used a high contrast green to yellow because all of the green is the grass, it's soft, it's fluffy, and all of the yellow is sandy, harder bottom, flatter bottom. So the stars line up nicely with, gaps in the bed. That's what we expect. Those are the mooring scars. But we see a lot of other scars. So we don't really know which ones are mooring scars and which ones aren't. There are lots of patches in eelgrass beds. And there was a lot of debris that in this particular harbor, it was hard to figure out exactly what was going on. We're also pretty concerned about how precisely we can measure the scar. These are 6-foot scars, and we're trying to look at changes that are sort of on the order of inches. And I think that this is stretching it a little too far. So this is our next step, is to take this map and measure out these scars and then compare it to divers who've measured these same scars. This is hummingbird data. It was the same kind of thing with the hummingbird data where we would see the scar really clearly in a lot of our passes. So this has a little red mark at the mooring, and then right around the mooring is the scar. But in other passes, we wouldn't be able to see the same. We wouldn't be able to see the same scar. So we actually couldn't even figure out if there was a preferred direction or not. So we think that it fails. We really can't do the mooring scar work with these acoustic methods. We did the same thing with single beam methods, and it looks pretty promising, especially with the pre-processed data, the raw data. So you have a gap, grass, but just like the side scan data, we don't know if those gaps are because of moorings. Some of them lined up to moorings well, and some of them didn't. This is process data, and you can see there are 3 dots right there that show no grass. All of the other dots around here are grass. So in order to actually measure that mooring scar, we have to nail the mooring scar exactly, and then we have sort of a coarse resolution in terms of trying to actually measure the scar. So it's really not going to work out. So our bottom line for the mooring scar, for the actually the eelgrass and the mooring scars, are to use aerials for the baseline mapping because they're so efficient. Then we can go in and verify using some of these acoustic methods. We'll use the Klein in deeper offshore waters when we need to. And then for all the mooring scars, we'll continue to use our divers, which they're very glad to hear. They always think I'm trying to put them out of business. And then drones. We'll see what we can do with drones. All right, do I have time? Yes. How long is this? This is really the best part, but part 2. So we went out to Plymouth, Kingston, and Duxbury Bays. This is the bay system where somebody called us and said, all the grass is gone. And we were really worried about that because this bay system has had a lot of grass over time. And we do a lot of work in here, winter flounder work, shark work, a lot of different species are studied in this bay system. DEP mapped, our Department of Environmental Protection, they do the aerial imagery. They mapped eelgrass polygons in this bay system in 2006 and 2012. And so we went out with both the biosonics and the hummingbird. Again, the hummingbird because the biosonics broke. Had to go back to Seattle to be fixed, and that cost us $1,000, which is the same amount as buying 2 hummingbirds. So we ground truthed the 2006 polygons. And this will tell you something about the timeline of the aerials. So we went out last August, and the imagery that was collected in 2012, the polygons still weren't available. They were just made available in January of this year. So we actually were ground truthing the 2006 polygons. We did 3 days of surveying. We mosaicked the hummingbird side scan data with Sonar TRX, and we used visual habitat for the biosonics. So here are the polygons that DEP had interpreted from the aerial imagery in 2006. And this is our survey coverage. So you can see we really just targeted existing beds to see if they were there. We didn't try to fully recreate the boundaries of the beds. We took those eelgrass polygons and we assessed each one. So we did all this work in ArcGIS. We modified the boundaries from those existing polygons when we could. We couldn't do all of them because we hadn't hit all of them, first of all. And some of them, we would only modify boundaries when there was clearly some sort of issue. We also used other sources of input to help with interpretation. So we had MassGIS ortho photos collected by the USGS in 2013. We had Google Maps from 2013 and 2014. And we had Microsoft aerial photos from 2013. The Microsoft photos were terrible, but Google Maps were really good, and the GIS ortho photos were spot on. They were perfect in this bay, but the MassGIS ortho photos don't exist in all the bays. It's a terrestrial focused survey. ArcGIS was used to calculate the areas, and our biggest challenge was patchy eelgrass. So this is an example where the green polygon is actually my polygon, and the DEP polygon would have extended across this and included this whole area, which is extremely patchy eelgrass. So that's sort of a big caveat. We're still working on fixing some of this, but that's a big caveat with our actual numbers, the actual aerial numbers. So here's the biosonics over a meadow mapped by DEP in 2012. this aerial image, and I don't have the DEP aerial images. I keep trying to get them, and I don't have them yet. But I have the 2013 imagery. And we see with our survey that there's no evidence of eelgrass in 2014. We actually went in not just with the biosonics, but also with video. We really were trying to hammer this down. We couldn't find any eelgrass left. So this particular polygon was removed from our final map. Sometimes there were clear mistakes in the DEP polygons, or maybe they were there in 2012 and not in 2013, but they were clearly missing from the aerial photos in 2013. Those polygons were removed as well. And here's just another example where we have some acoustic data weighing in. So this is the 2013 aerial. Here's the DEP polygon. And then we did sort of a finer scale, really trying to focus in on the main eelgrass bed. And we informed it with the acoustic data that we had in that area. So we've seen a loss of 2,000 acres since 1951. So here we have 1951, 1995, 2001, 06, 2012, 2014. So these are all these green polygons are from DEP mapping efforts. Since 2012, we've lost 700 acres. So it's the work we were focusing on in our work, but I'll explain in a second, but these actual numbers are still really squishy. However, there are notable losses, clear big losses of eelgrass in Duxbury Bay. So the blue here is Duxbury Bay. This bed, which really persisted for a while, is gone in 06 and continues to lose even these edges really until today. So that whole big bed is gone. And this was a major feature in the center of the bay. The prominent bed in Kingston Harbor, which is over here, is greatly reduced. So clearly between 1951 and 1995, we can assume that they did a more careful job drawing polygons, but this has certainly lost a lot of coverage in the intervening time. It's a big loss. All right, so we know that some things definitely disappeared even between 2012 and 2014, but some of our changes are due to different mapping methods, so we need to work on that. Our mapping resolution is a lot different than DEP's mapping resolution. Our interests are a lot finer spatial resolution than theirs. Our acoustic imagery did a good job of sort of summarizing eelgrass meadows. It didn't pick up really patchy eelgrass. It really only picks up patterns from thick eelgrass beds, and that's what we want to see. So we like that. We think it makes it easier to identify these meadows and deal with this patchiness issue. But we definitely need a more quantifiable approach. In order to more definitively map the change in this bay system, what we have to do next is go back and actually remap those aerials. So we're trying to get, so what I just found out a couple weeks ago is like I have to go to somebody's office in Boston and I have to dig through their map drawers and pull out the aerial photos. They're not digitized, and I mean 2012 must be digitized, but it's really hard to like find the right people to connect with. So, and this is another state agency. We all work together. So we'll get this figured out by the Eelgrass meeting in March. I'm sure of it. And I would love anybody here to develop visual habitat for hummingbird. It's a challenge, a request. And I don't have any money. It's a great like master's or a PhD project. You could make money if you developed it. It would be a product you could sell. I couldn't buy it. I would try. And a lot of people helped with this work. We borrowed the Klein from MITC grant, so they get the biggest shout out. The state of Maine, we borrowed our jet ski from the state of Maine. They used our multi-beam system for a summer, and we used their jet ski, and I got the better end of the deal. And then a whole lot of other people have helped out with this. So that, I'll take any questions. Thanks for sticking with me on your non-holiday weekend.
showed some aerial imagery for the biosonics data for 2013, and then said that in 2014 all the eelgrass had gone.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't clear to me whether you had aerial imagery for both those years, or that from the biosonics data from 2014 you concluded that what was there in 2013 had gone.
We concluded from the biosonics data. We have some aerial maps from our Lighthawk flights where somebody holds a camera outside, and that data hasn't been processed yet. So we'll incorporate that into this. But for this, what we did was took the 2013 imagery and found no evidence through the biosonics or our other field work that that bed was still there.
Right, so that was my next question. Did you have some drop cameras there?
Yeah, we double checked a couple. We double checked a couple of areas because we were very surprised. Even some areas that have been there since 1951 were now missing. So.
On one of your last slides, you were showing the map of Massachusetts and the two areas.
Yeah.
And if you can put that back up again, because I think what I saw, yeah, that one right there. So the red area, in 1951, there was that big patch of eelgrass, and then by 2001 it was gone, but by 2006 it was back again.
Yeah.
In 2012 it was reduced, but still there, then it was gone. So
which one are you in here?
Yeah. And then see, and then
Yeah,
go down to there, and
bigger.
it's back again. Right? It's back.
It's bigger. Yeah, it has.
No, bigger. It's kind of there.
Yeah.
And then it's almost there as much as it was in 51. So my question is, how long does it take? Does it take eelgrass to colonize an area that doesn't have any eelgrass in it?
Well, in this particular area, I don't think it never disappeared entirely. Right? In this bed here, there is still eelgrass through time.
Okay.
So, but to your question, we don't know, I guess, is really the answer.
Yeah.
So eelgrass will grow vegetatively from surrounding plants. It grows out very efficiently, actually. It's a quick growing plant. In areas where either the water quality is reduced or something else is stressing the plants in some way, it doesn't grow well. And in areas where, like Duxbury Bay, where the beds are gone entirely, there could be no vegetative growth, of course. And then you need seeds to get in there. And in more closed systems or systems with no connection to other eelgrass beds, it won't happen. You have to go in there and put the plants back. And the reason we haven't gone into tried to restore in a lot of our coastal systems is because the water quality is still so poor.
So is that time series reflecting some kind of fluctuations in water quality? Sewage disposal or whatever?
That's a great question that's what we're starting to ask now. So what's causing this?
Yeah.
So generally people assume it's a water quality story. That's what's happened and has been well confirmed in our Cape Cod estuaries. This system actually does have a wastewater treatment plant in it on the south end. But it's not it's not like,
No, one-to-one.
yeah, it's not like we install this wastewater treatment plant, all the eelgrass went away.
Yeah.
It's not that clear of a story. So there may be other things happening here, like increased turbidity from, windier, it's a very shallow system, windier winters. We don't really know at this point.
A lot of degrees of freedom.
Obviously, your focus is primarily on habitat mapping. Other states, Connecticut, New York, Long Island Sound, New Jersey, are they wrestling with similar types of things?
Yeah.
Lessons learned from them? Are they looking at the same type of equipment, same type of challenges?
Yeah, I think most groups are using aerial imagery. And the state level mapping is pretty, 1 to 10,000 scale, or they'll target individual beds and track them over time instead of doing a whole statewide approach. And so we're really getting in at these sort of finer spatial scales.
Yeah, the cynical view, of course, is complete coverage with aerial photography at very low resolution, which, what's the benefit?
Yeah. And to your point here, actually, as I am digging more and more into the work that was done by DEP, of course I would, they've done really great work, and we love and trust the work that they've done. But at very, very small spatial scales, we have a really different interpretation of the aerials. So we really need to go back in and, for when we're looking at an individual bay, we really need to go back in and reassess the data.
It seems to me that it's really depending on who did the interpretation.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's difficult to compare from one to another.
Mhm. And this patchiness thing, right? Like, so what I call an eelgrass meadow and what you call an eelgrass meadow might be different. And so we're thinking of actually creating sort of a, just a guideline for the interpreters. So we all have, and in some cases we may just do, if there's a blade, becomes a meadow. That's what it is.
That's one on a Great Bay here, we have some little eelgrass now.
Yeah.
A blade is a meadow.
Yeah, and that's how we treat it in permitting, definitely. If there's any grass there, it gets protected. And a lot of the homeowners think we're nuts because there used to be like a really huge bed there, and what's the big deal? And it feels funny on my feet, and it's a nuisance. And we're like, yeah, but like we're really losing a lot of it. Right.
What's your definition between patchy and dense? I think you called it two categories.
We don't have one right now.
So whether you can see it or not, or whether the instrument can see it?
Well, that's what I'd like to look at, where we stop seeing the signal in the acoustics, and that might be an easy way to define it.
If it's consistent.
If it's consistent, right. Because there really is a difference. There is some sort of magic density at which you see it clearly in the acoustics. So.
Is there a height limitation? I mean, I remember some of the old acoustic stuff, you couldn't see if it was too close to the bottom. If they're 10-centimeter plants or 20-centimeter plants.
Yeah, no. Especially single beam systems, they see everything. Yeah, they see even the smallest. Then it becomes sort of an interpretation question where the ground truthing will still be. You'll have to do some ground truthing. That's the other nice thing with the acoustics is you're already there, so you can check it really quickly. Yeah.
Is there a relationship between quality of acoustic signal and the tidal height in which you gather that signal?
Yes. The deeper the water, the better the quality.
So you want to go out at high tide?
Yeah. Or, well, it depends on the depth of your waters. We found that we also had a problem with the jet ski sucking up the eelgrass. Don't tell anybody that. We really needed, so we were in West Falmouth Harbor, that was about 10 feet. We really needed about 5 feet of water. So in the areas where it was already 5 feet at low tide, it didn't matter the tide. So somewhere in between 5 and maybe even 7 feet, you get a great acoustic image. When it gets shallower than that, you see it's a lot harder to interpret.
I guess I have a methodology type question. You showed some of the scar data,
Mm-hmm.
and you said you can see that better with the climb than with the hummingbird.
Yeah.
Were those data obtained in the same type of year and the same growth stage, or is that done at different times?
They were totally different harbors, actually.
Totally different. So
They were
it's
different
like
years
maybe
and different harbors, different depths. Yeah. And that's part of our, like the place where we did the hummingbird, we couldn't even bring the Klein in there. It was too shallow, too many moorings. There was no other option. So we could take the hummingbird up to where we did the Klein survey. I wonder if we're going to do that. Because we need to redo the Klein survey up there anyway to see what has happened with those scars in the intervening years. Although the divers still see them all. So the conservation mooring story nutshell is the conservation moorings aren't working that well. But that's a whole other talk. So we probably will go up there with both the Klein and the hummingbird to really look at that in some more detail. Again, because the hummingbird is so easy to deploy. And if we can really optimize it, and even with processing, we just did like default processing as quickly as possible. We didn't try to optimize the processing at all, and we might be able to get more out of it. with some more concerted effort on the processing.
Is the use of LiDAR just too prohibitively expensive? You'd think airborne LiDAR would be an interesting way to do this really rapidly.
Yeah, there are LiDAR surveys of the whole coast. They're all targeting like coastal erosion or coastal.
Well, the USGS has a
sediment
big
processes.
national program of doing LiDAR survey.
Yeah, and so there's a survey that was done in conjunction with the Army Corps. I guess USGS is the
Yeah.
LiDAR, and the state looking at using a LiDAR method that was optimized for water. And they did all the eelgrass surveys at the same time. I don't know what they found from that, but it's something worth focusing on. We still have issues with the deeper beds. And the same with the hyperspectral. I think there's a lot of, that's a great tool to use for this. But none of that can we go out when somebody calls us. We can't, call up whoever flies the LiDAR and say, oh, there might be a hydraulic clamor in this bed, can you go check it out?
No.
So.
But you could do annual survey, or you didn't have to do one. You could just get the data from the Corps or USGS.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think several different aerial methods are still needed for the statewide approach.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a good point.
In areas where the eelgrass has gone away, is there some other species that's taken over typically?
We get algae, but
Large
not
algae
even
ground?
most of them are still floating around too. But yeah, we get a couple of different green algae and a lot of red algae.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you don't see that at all?
We're what I think we're going to do next summer is really find algae beds and try the same thing with them. We haven't seen them. So even in a couple areas where there was some algae, eelgrass intermixed, we did some, a few lines. So there's only a few lines, but we did pretty high resolution ground truthing and acoustics to see where the algae eelgrass line was. We couldn't see the algae. So that's great, but we need to do some more work.
And just to sort of touch on that, we're actually looking at mapping eelgrass with LiDAR in Barnaby Bay, New Jersey. And far and away the biggest issue that we've come to in terms of coming up with accurate maps is algae versus eelgrass. Really, really, really hard to discern in the LiDAR data and in the imagery. And that's an area where there's been pretty significant algae takeover. So then it's sort of a trade-off. You need a lot more ground truthing effort to be done. And that's one of the biggest obstacles that we're hitting right now.
Yeah.
So my question's around ground truthing. Done a little bit of ground truthing in eelgrass beds. It seems like with a towed camera, you can usually get an absent, sparse, like maybe 0 to 25%, and then 25 to 75, kind of like moderate coverage, and then a dense bed. So I'm just wondering if there's been efforts to sort of classify your ground truthing.
We haven't yet. Our ground truthing, again, hasn't been quantified at all. We just drop the camera and say, yep, it's eelgrass. But along those lines, I guess I'd be interested in learning more about how you actually quantified the towed video, because that's something we've struggled with in other projects.
Yeah, basically just had like
getting
a
that.
visual guide of
Okay.
what represented based on shoot counts, or when you put down a grid on a low tide, or just percent cover basically, and then so
To
you know
to
kind of
train the
visually what you're
toad.
looking- to sort of training your eye.
Okay.
And then it was actually towed in a sort of radius, within a radius, and you're kind of saying, well, even if it's a patchy bed, after a few kind of sections towing around it, you have a sense of what's there.
Yeah.
And I think it's reasonable to classify it within those broad ranges.
Yeah.
You can't really get any better than that.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Oh.